Okay. Hello. How you guys doing?
Hello.
What's
Hey, how's
up?
it going?
How's it going?
All right. So we'll
Doing
get
good.
a few people in here before we start getting into things. But we got Jason Dustal of Murideo. Uh, Sammie's been here a couple times. I'm sure most people here know Matt or Ninjishin AV. But Jason, if you want to introduce yourself and what you do.
Yeah, Cecil, thank you guys so much for having me. It's fun to always hang out and do these things. But my name is Jason Dustal. I've been in the AV industry since I was a child. I'm an enthusiast turned professional. I started installing in about 2002 or so. And by 2008, I had discovered a proper ISF calibration and went down that rabbit hole all those years ago. And, here we are now. I've calibrated thousands of displays over the years. I teach the ISF course. I have my own course that I teach for Murideo. This is fun for me. So thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, of course, anytime. Um, yeah. So I basically just got my Murideo 7.
Yes.
Sammie's got his 8K one sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
Matt's getting the 6 pretty soon.
Good.
So
Six is coming. Yep.
yep, just figured kind of focus on that, what they do,
Yeah,
the differences between them,
sure.
uh, and any other products you want to talk about.
Yeah. And Cecil, I don't know if it's easier for you as we're kind of talking about these things. Maybe we could go to the Murideo website if that sounds like a good idea so folks can kind of see what we're talking about rather than hearing us blab about it
Yep,
on and
sure.
on. So I can do it from my end, or if you want to do it from your end, and I'll just walk everybody through it, or whatever's easier for you, my friend.
All right, I'll pull it up.
So as Cecil's pulling that stuff up, just to kind of break it down to what we're going to be looking at Murideo here, we make several different products for installing and troubleshooting and evaluating displays and whatnot. So we do have a couple of kits. One is it's more powerful and it's more for people who are doing like what Sammie and Cecil and Matt and I do for calibration. There's another kit that's kind of more for the everyday installer, doesn't have a lot of the calibration stuff. And then we have some lab grade bench test type tools like the 7G, which I'm sure we'll talk about here pretty soon. Sammie was one of the first ones to grab one of those. So it's it's an extremely powerful piece for a calibrator. But what we really were aiming for when we made that device was not only for the high-end calibrators, but also the manufacturers, because you can do all kinds of different things in there. I'm sure Sammie has seen most of it, if
Yeah.
not all of it. But if you're a manufacturer and you want to test the latency of eARC on when using like DTS, for example, that kind of stuff is really important to the manufacturer, because if they have crappy latency, they need to make it better, because that's the whole thing right now, especially gamers, is latency, latency, latency. So it's a very powerful tool. We also have what Cecil's got on display right there now it's called the MS Test Pro. We made that in kind of collaboration with a company called Media Solutions out of Israel. Um, those folks came from Valens, who makes Hdbaset T chips for Hdbaset T and for all the manufacturers like Murideo and AV Pro. So that's an Hdbaset T tester that's used in the field by the integrators out there. So Cecil, if you want to kind of run through each product, swing up to that product page, and let's go to the Fox and Hound first.
Okay.
We'll kind of start from the bottom. Now we're here. So this is a kind of a point-to-point troubleshooting kit, and this is what I always refer to as the everyday installer's tool. When you're on site doing an installation and maybe you're getting things set up, what's really nice about this is before you even unbox your display or your projector or whatever it might be, you can take the analyzer out of this kit. It's a generator and analyzer, so two pieces. You can put the analyzer where the projector or where the TV is going to go, and you can start pumping signals through the rack and through your components with the generator, and just make sure that the signal you're expecting to show up at the projector is, and you know that because on the analyzer screen, it straight up tells you resolution, frame rate, bit depth, chroma, HDCP version, all these different types of things to let you know that the correct signal is getting to the display. And then you can go ahead and unbox the display and put it up. So it's good for helping set up. It's an excellent tool for troubleshooting. It's kind of the one that we recommend to almost everybody. But when you have a point-to-point kit like that, you could literally insert the generator or the analyzer anywhere in the signal chain to find out like why 4K 60 is not getting to the display and what's coming into the display is 1080p. So it's like, well, if I'm starting off with 4K 60 on one end and I'm getting 1080p 60 on the other end, something in the signal chain broke the signal and knocked it down and scaled it down. So you can take these tools and you can go from device to device to device to device in the signal chain and figure out where the failure was. but a lot of other interesting, really unique things too, like being able to read the EDIT of a display, being able to copy the EDIT of a display, just lots of cool little tricks you can do with that kit. So from there, we kind of graduate up to, I call this we call this kind of the brother and sister. From here, we go to more or less the mom and dad. So if you could see, so swing over to the products tab and let's look at the 6 pair. And this is a very similar concept to the Fox and Hound kit. It's an end-to-end, point-to-point troubleshooting kit, but also a lot more added features with these guys. So this is actually what we made first. The one on the left there is the 6G. This happens to be the 8K version, but in 2013 or 14, there was a big need in the market for a portable, small, handheld signal generator that could do 4K HDR and Dolby Vision and whatnot. And nothing existed at the time. And Sammie can attest to this, but signal generators before then, before these came out, were these big honking expensive Sencor units that were, they were great units, don't get me wrong, but in 2002 they were $10,000, in 2002 money. So these things are just crazy expensive. So our CEO, who worked for Sencor for like 20 years, left the company when Sencor stopped producing troubleshooting and measurement tools like this. So there was a hole in the market, and this new HDMI 2.0 thing was coming. So our CEO, along with another one of the owners, Lowell, Sammie, you've met Lowell before.
Yeah, I met Lowell.
Yeah, so they came in and say, well, you know what, guys, if nobody else is making this stuff and 18 gigabits per second is right around the corner, why don't we just make it? So that's what we did. And in 2012, we already had an HDMI 2.0 signal generator that was ready for the new format. So that's one of the things we kind of pride ourselves on, is kind of being ahead of the game. So once we came up with some good test and measurement equipment, that led us into making extenders and matrix switches and all kinds of little installer fix-it tools. And now we're just doing all kinds of crazy stuff like 16 by 16 matrix switches. We already have some HDMI 2.1 stuff. So it's not coming, it's here. So all this 2.1 stuff is very important. Hence the need for what you're seeing on the screen right now. And this is the same 6A and 6G troubleshooting kit, but this is the 8K version. And I think, Sammie, you're on the 8K version of the 7G, right?
Yeah, I'm on the 8K of the 7G because I mean, one thing I want to say about Murideo is when it comes to being able to manipulate the EDIT and copy the EDIT, like that's huge. Like people don't realize like how important that is.
Right.
And being able to break out like troubleshooting from instead of the entire video chain, being able to start at one piece and start to see where the point of failure is at.
Yeah,
like, that's huge. And when I first got Murideo, because I use a bunch of different calibration software, but primarily at that time I was using Calman.
Right.
And the only option I had was, well, not the only option, but the one that was fit my need at that given time was a Video Forge.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
Is it was locked to Calman.
Right.
As soon as I went to Murideo, like everything just opened up. I was able to use it on every single software.
Sure.
Ran on battery. I had no problems with it. Like I always had various issues with the Video Forge, and for different things. It was pretty solid, but with Murideo, it's been constant. So then when I went from my 6G and I saw the 7, I was like,
started drooling everywhere.
Pretty much, because I mean, like when you go to someone's house now to do a calibration, there's a good chance that they don't have a Blu-ray player, right? They don't have something that you can load up outside of a USB drive, like demo content. With my 7, that's literally all I need now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we built that thing very robust to do stuff like that. I've done the same thing, Sammie. I've got some reference clips on my 7G that I use in the case that somebody doesn't have a Blu-ray player. And that, I mean, we got to live in the reality of it, but a lot of folks now don't have a Blu-ray player anymore. Meanwhile, I just watched Blade, the original Blade, in 4K UHD HDR last night on disc, and wow, it looked awesome. So although a lot of people out there are getting away from Blu-ray players and stuff for the convenience of streaming, I totally get that. And streaming is starting to look better and better. And in fact, nowadays with some like BBC type stuff that you find on Netflix, to the average person looking at that side by side compared to playing a physical disc, it's almost hard to tell the difference now, especially in brighter scenes. So where you really want to look for, and this is going to ruin everybody, I'm sorry, but when you're watching streaming, look really hard in the darker, in the blacks and the shadows. If you're going to see any compression artifacts from streaming, it's going to be there. So comparing a really dark movie or a dark scene from a TV show on physical disc versus streaming, the physical disc spanks the streaming all day, every day, and probably always will. But Sammie, thanks for the kind words. I mean, that was really one of the things, and the reason for us making this tool is we wanted something that was reliable, portable, and didn't like absolutely murder your wallet. So the nice thing is about us being a family-owned and family-run company. And Sammie, hopefully you can attest to this, or maybe not because you haven't had any problems. But if you do have a problem with any of the Murideo equipment, maybe it's a dead battery or a broken USB port or something, like we jump on that stuff immediately. So
yeah, no, I haven't had any problems,
yeah.
But there were times like when I first got my 7, like I had questions.
Oh, sure.
And not just that, just AV Pro Edge in general. Like
right.
Anytime I've ever had like a question, I can just send off an email. And if I don't get something back that same day, I have something in my inbox first thing in the morning.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
Super responsive.
Yeah.
And now, there is great. Like I love it.
So, and Sammie, as you know, I mean, you've got my work email address and stuff, but if anybody watching or listening has any questions about any of this gear that we're talking about today, or any of the capabilities, or what it can and can't do, and how it might make your life easier, just shoot us an email, info@murideo.com. There's only 2 of us or 3 of us now that get those emails. So I'm monitoring that email box pretty much all day, every day. So feel free, guys, if you do have any questions. I did want to touch a little bit on the whole EDID thing. Should we, maybe for the listeners, maybe this is a good question for Cecil, should we just cover what EDID is really quick?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So EDID is
Will's here, so.
Oh, good. Extended Display Identification Data, EDID, and now it's enhanced. So it's technically EEDID at the moment. But what EDID is, it's a very basic. It's a communication between the what we call the sync device, which is the display where the signal ends up. We call it the sync device. So the sync device has to tell what's connected to it what its capabilities are. So the device connected to it could say, okay, well, here's what kind of signal I'm going to spit out. So if a TV is asking in its EDID and saying that it's capable of 1080p 60, and you connect a 4K source to it, it's going to get knocked down to 1080p because that's what the EDID of the display says. So just the very basics. There's way more into it, but that's the easy thing. So you might be in a situation, especially if you're an installer, where like you're not getting the proper signal into the TV, and the TV's across the house in another room. Meanwhile, the rack is over here in a garage or a closet in a completely different room. So we can go over to the television and plug the analyzer into the TV. There's a button here that says EDID, EDID select, and then we're going to hold down a button, and we're going to copy the EDID from the display. This happens to be a Samsung display I'm plugged into right now, and the EDID right now says Samsung. The preferred timing is 3840 by 2160/60, so 4K 60. It gives us a few different ideas about what the audio capabilities are. So here we have LPCM, DTS 6-channel, a few different things listed. Does it support 3D? No. Does it support HDR? Yes. So a lot of very valuable information, a lot of clues here that'll help you with troubleshooting. So if I copy the EDID over here into the analyzer, I press and hold. There's a little button here that's A and B. We're going to press either one and press OK. And now the EDID is copied into this analyzer. So to the system, or to anything I'm going to plug into, this analyzer is now that Samsung TV. So I can take the analyzer now and I can go back to the rack that's in the garage, and I can start plugging things into the analyzer to see how those things respond to the EDID of the Samsung right here. So it really is a time saver, because if you could imagine, like, you're running over the TV to see if it's playing the right signal, you're hitting the info button, it's not. So now you're running back to the rack and trying to play with things to make it all work. And, it ends up being just a complete nightmare. So these really simple tools we wanted to make for everybody, because, coming from an installer's background, almost everybody in our company, the whole point of this was to make tools for the installers that are easy to use. So Sammie, I don't know if you're doing much like troubleshooting and stuff, or are you just doing more calibration?
I do more calibration, but like, for instance, when I was building my theater, like I had a scenario where, because I had talked to you before about like what's in my setup, and essentially I was having, what was I doing? I was having something come from, what was it? It was the Kaleidoscape into the processor, from the processor into the Lumagen, from the Lumagen into a Balun, from the bow end all the way to the receiver into the
Right.
projector. And I was getting a dropout because I couldn't really, since I didn't actually have anything to fully test it out the way I wanted to, you literally had to go from like step by step by step by step.
Yeah.
And I had one calibration where the gentleman had a lot of audio control, had a Sony projector,
Sure.
had RTI, had a Panasonic, and he was having an issue with it passing HDR. Right. So we have to troubleshoot that. So I don't do a lot of troubleshooting. It really depends on the client's theater setup, because sometimes it could literally be a television and soundbar. Sometimes it's like a full Control 4, super high end system with like everything in it.
Yeah. There's a video also, I'm trying to find it right now. I know it's on the YouTube channel, but there's a video I did with almost the exact same issue where the guy had a brand new, I can't remember what size. I think it was a 75Q900R from a couple of years ago. That was the one with the native 8K panel, but only HDMI 2.0. Go figure. But you are able, by the way, to do some thumb drive stuff with 8K if you'd like to, which I've done and it looks awesome. But there is a video on the YouTube channel that it was the same issue, Sammie. The guy wasn't getting HDR over to the TV. So the rack was in, luckily it was just one room over, but it wasn't too bad, but a very similar situation. There was a source, a couple sources. One of them was a Panasonic Blu-ray player, the one we all love, the really nice one. The whole entire rack went into an extender. Category cable was ran over near the TV. The receiver end of the extender kit was there, and then HDMI straight into the TV. So I would put in like a movie like Gemini Man, which you're expecting HDR or Dolby Vision. It's a Samsung, so it would be HDR and 60 frames per second and all that good stuff. And we fire up the movie and we look in the Samsung's menu where you can see in the picture settings whether it's HDR or not, and no HDR. So we're like, okay, well, what the heck is going on here? So I decided to film all this to prove a point of how easy the tools are to use. So step number one was take the analyzer and plug the Blu-ray player directly into it. And sure enough, coming out of the Blu-ray player is 4K 60 HDR. Okay, great. So we know it's not the Blu-ray player causing an issue. So what's next in the signal chain? Next in the signal chain was I think a Marantz AVR. So I plugged the output of the Marantz into the analyzer, and sure enough, we've got 4K 60 HDR. Meanwhile, Gemini Man is playing, and I can see it on the analyzer right here on the screen, and I can hear it. There's a little speaker built in. So I knew the signal coming out of the rack was okay. The problem was at the extender. So, okay, so everything coming out of the rack is okay. When I say that, I mean the source and then the AVR. So now let's go to the receiver end of the extender kit. Let's plug the analyzer directly into the output of that. And sure enough, it was 4K 60, but no HDR. So like, okay, what the heck is going on here? And it turns out I Googled, and I think the guy said he bought the extender off Amazon. So I found it on Amazon, and everywhere on the extender, it says 4K, 4K, 4K. But guess what it didn't do?
HDR.
No HDR. So that was the culprit. The point of the story is it took me about 3 or 4 minutes to figure out what was wrong. Because otherwise, what are you doing? I mean, otherwise you're going to run back to the rack. You're putting in different discs. You're checking the output configuration of the player. You're doing different things on the Marantz, and you're just like running around and chasing your tail. And it sucks. I've been there. I did installs for 15 years. These tools didn't exist when I was doing installations in the field every day. But for those of you who have been doing it long enough, and I remember the days of, Sammie, you might have done this before yourself, but I'm climbing up a ladder with a Blu-ray player in my hand, like trying to balance it and plugging a Blu-ray player straight into the projector, trying to troubleshoot. Because
I usually stack stuff.
Yeah, right. So like, and that's what's so great about these tools, guys, is that like you literally can just start plugging things in and seeing exactly what's happening. Now we could go the other way too. Like I could take the generator and I could pump out 18 gigs, 4K 60 out of the generator into that extender kit, put the analyzer on the other end and see if it's actually getting through. So not only are we using the tools to test entire systems, we can also use the tools to test inputs and outputs of whatever device you want to. So actually, Cecil, if you want to go back to the Fox and Hound page really quick, there's a really simple, cool little diagram that sort of gives you an idea of how all this stuff works. And go down to I think it's in the resources tab. See the resources or gallery. Look in the gallery and scroll down, down, down. Okay, not there. Let's scroll back up.
I think applications.
Yeah, it's in there somewhere. We just moved a bunch of stuff. There it is. Okay, so this is like a very basic example of a signal chain. It's actually not too basic because there's a matrix switch in there, but let's look at what's going on. So on the left side, the generator would be in place of your source. So that goes into a transmitter for an extender kit. That, of course, gets converted over to category cable because this is Hdbase-T. Then you have the extender receiver. That's the RX. That signal goes into a matrix switch. It's probably a distributed system around the house or around the property. One output of the matrix switch goes into the AVR. The AVR passes audio and video over to the display, which in this case is the analyzer. So you can see on the generator on the left, if we press and hold the 4K button, that'll max everything out to 18 gigs. And then you look at the screen on the analyzer and it says 1080p. So you're like, okay, well, now I know that the proper signal is not getting through. How can I test this? So the first thing I would do, and you could go either way with this, there's no right or wrong way to do it because you're going to find out, you're going to find the same answer regardless. So we could take the analyzer and check the output of the matrix switch. And if the output of the matrix switch is still 1080p, now we can go over to the extender, plug the analyzer into that and see what's coming out of that. And if that's 4K 60, then what's the common denominator there? It's the matrix switch. So maybe the matrix switch isn't configured correctly. Maybe it has a mismatched EDID. Maybe it needs a firmware update. I mean, who knows? But the point is that now you know that something with the matrix switch is knocking the signal down to 1080p. And hopefully, it's a matrix switch you're familiar with and you can log into it and, reconfigure it if you need to. One thing about the AV Pro matrix switch is I'll get a shameless plug here, but it has a default IP address. As long as your laptop or smartphone's on the same network, you can log into the straight into the matrix switch and do any configuration you want from there. So it's really helpful stuff. So again, the Fox and Hound is kind of more of like your everyday installer's tool. And then if we go back to the 6A, 6G, this gets a little more in depth as far as the testing and troubleshooting. But where most people are really attracted to this kit is the 6G generator is what works with CalMan, ColorSpace, and all the other great calibration software programs out there. So Sammie remembers this. Going back to the old Sencore days, you would have to find the pattern in the Sencore, hit the OK button, take your measurement, then find the next pattern and hit OK, take the measurement. So it was this constant like manual process. So imagine trying to do like a 20-point grayscale reading and a color gamut reading with, 25, 50, 75, and then 100% targets on your saturation sweeps. It was a nightmare. So when the 6G came out, it was like, ooh, wait a second, we can automate a lot of this. So AutoCal is a completely different thing, but the automated process within CalMan or ColorSpace, that's what was new at the time. So, we get to the grayscale page in CalMan and hit one button and the test pattern generator puts out what it needs to. The light meter reads the color of the light and the intensity of the light and it spits everything back into the software program to tell us what the data is, X and Y points in your luminance levels. So once we were able to automate a lot of the calibration process, it spoiled us right away and it got us to a point where we were able to do them much faster and much more accurately too, because it took a lot of the human element out of it. And, we all push the wrong button and makes mistakes sometimes. So that really helped a ton. Now this gets a little bit deeper too. In the general sense of things, it is like a point-to-point, kind of troubleshooting or installation kit like we talked about with the Fox and Hound. But where this gets really crazy is both for the analyzer and the generator, we have some free software, which is on the website. You can download it. And even without any physical product, you can at least look at the software and see some of its capabilities. So, Sammie, I don't know if you're using the software too much. Have you experimented with it a lot or no?
I used it a little bit more on my 7G. On my 7, since I got the AK one, which is what I think won't have the AK one now for about a week and a half, 2 weeks.
Yeah, sure.
I haven't uploaded anything since. But initially what I did is once I got the 7G, there were a few, so the ramps for your primaries and your secondaries where it's horizontal and or vertical and it's either 50 or 100%.
Sure.
So I had found one that was 75% that I wanted to use. And I uploaded that one. I could upload it in like a PNG. And the software is good. I have not used the software too much for the actual web control of the device, just because anytime I have my 7 up, I have a calibration software up, so I just haven't done it. But I did play around with it a little bit when I first got it, and it's definitely cool if I needed to control it where I was like away from it.
Right, exactly.
But I haven't been in that scenario where I've needed to use it.
Yeah.
But
and
it's
you know,
there.
For the folks out there who are doing the type of work Sammie's doing, you might not need to use that stuff. But if you're like a manufacturer or something like that, or maybe you manufacture like AVRs, for example, you might want to get into that software and see a lot more detail. So like, for example, when you read the EDIT of a display on the generator, it gives you like the basics. It gives you the manufacturer, it gives you the preferred timing, whether it can do HDR or not, whether it can do 3D or not, and a few other things. But if you needed to get really down and dirty with some of the data, that's where the software comes in handy. So like in the software, you can see like the hex code of the EDID if you ever needed to do anything crazy like that. And for someone working in the field, not a big deal, but if you're a manufacturer, it's a very big deal. So the software is quite handy. On the analyzer side of it, if you use the software with the analyzer, you can do a lot of really cool stuff. So like, let's say you're at an installation or maybe your own system, it has this like intermittent problem where it just like flashes randomly. You can hook up the 6A into the system, like let's say in place of the display. And with the software on the 6A, you can start what we call a log analyzer. So over time, you can set it for up to like, I forget off the top of my head because it's like days and days and days, but you can let it run for quite a while and then come back to it and look at the software. And it tells you straight up like when something dropped out, how long it dropped out for, at what time it dropped out for. So all these things help. They give you clues when you're troubleshooting to kind of figure out like what's going on from there. But this is what we came out with first. This is the tried and true. And we were really happy with this piece. But the feedback from our customers was, okay, this is great, but it's a little expensive for a lot of things and features that I'm not using. So that was the reason why we made the Fox and Hound. The price is cut down significantly. Can't do quite as much, but it still does everything that you need to do kind of your everyday troubleshooting. And while we're here, and Sammie just jogged my memory on something. If you guys, Cecil, if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, I'm trying to remember where it's at because we just moved a bunch of stuff. Yeah, there you go. So on that bottom of the page right there, like we have a ton of test patterns. So feel free to use them. They're 100% free to download. We even stream some of those on YouTube, which can be real handy. The ISF geometry pattern, which is the gray one that you see up there on the screen and has this big like diamond shape with a circle in the middle. That's a test pattern that we like to use for two different things: to check the aspect ratio and the bit mapping of the display compared to the source material, but also to set like your sharpness control. So this being able to be streamed on YouTube is really handy because if you got a brand new TV and you don't know what's going on with the aspect ratio stuff, you can pull up that test pattern on YouTube and you can see right away, like if overscan is turned on or if you're in the wrong aspect ratio. So really helpful stuff. We try to make it easy. We give as much away for free as we possibly can, but these are downloadable as well. And bear with me just a moment and I'll tell you exactly where you can download them.
I use that pattern for 3 different things. I use it when I set up meter. I use it for setting up sharpness and for aspect, because it's like what people don't like for how they're seeing it on the stream. They're probably seeing kind of like that almost starburst looking section within the circle in the center circle. Like those are very, very fine lines. And as soon as you start playing with sharpness, the minute you go over that threshold, you get ringing, and it's so easy to see.
Yeah,
like, patterns like this are really good.
It is. And test patterns are test patterns, but what does that mean in real life? So a good example is, and let's just go back just a moment and describe what this sharpness and ringing thing is. So of course it's really hard to see on the stream right now, but if you guys go to the website or go to the YouTube channel, you'll see the test pattern a little bit easier. But the test pattern, if you can imagine, has a gray background, and across the vertical and the horizontal, you have these strips. And inside of those strips, you have these different markers that tell you like where the pixels are. So from left to right, it goes 0 to 1920. From top to bottom, it goes 0 to 1080. So like if you're looking at the test pattern and the diamonds, the tips are chopped off, the overscan is turned on. It's a dead giveaway. But also, once you get the overscan under control, then you can adjust the sharpness. So if you have a gray background and you have these little tiny hash marks or ruler marks, those are black. So if you have a gray background with a black hash mark in front of the gray background, and there's a white distortion or white halo around the black line, that's an artifact that we call ringing. So turning the sharpness up too high is a very, very, very big mistake. And it's funny because it's completely counterintuitive to what you might think. So, the average person who hasn't studied this stuff at all, they look in their TV menu and they say, oh, there's a sharpness control. And then, Matt, what do they do when they see a sharpness control?
Oh, it makes it sharper.
I want a sharper picture, right? So like, I'm not going to call out any manufacturers here, but there's one manufacturer that they straight up in their menu, sometimes they'll have like the adjustment and then a brief description of the adjustment next to it. Yeah. So it literally said a higher value means a sharper picture. A value of 100 is the sharpest picture. So like, we're looking at this and Sammie or I or whoever will pull up a test pattern and we'll go, what the hell are you guys talking about? And it's completely counterintuitive. So in the general terms of things and general sense of things, you want to turn the sharpness down to get rid of any of those weird artifacts that might be surrounding some of the lines and whatnot on the test pattern. Now, again, test patterns are test patterns, but what does that mean in real world content? So I'll use an example that I was watching last night. I'm having weird internet issues with my at my house right now. So last night I decided to pop in a couple discs. I watched Blade, like I said, which looked awesome, tons of fun. That movie holds up really well too. Then I popped in one of the Blue Planet, or was it Planet Earth 2? It was one of them. And you guys might remember this. There's I think it's Blue Planet because it's the Coastline episode where it's like all these really bright red crabs and they're crawling through the rocks and they're going and eating the green the stuff on the rocks. And they zoom in on these crabs in these rocks like really, really, really tight. And there's a lot of fine detail in there. So in reality, when you look at something like that, everything has these nice, soft, normal, natural looking edges. But when you crank the sharpness up, you end up making things look like they're cutouts. So the crab looks like he's almost photoshopped in. All the detail in the rocks and the foliage and the plants and the water and the sand, all that stuff gets like super blown out and super distorted. So where you might be turning up the sharpness, thinking you're getting a sharper picture, actually ruining the sharpness. So you generally want to be down on that adjustment. Now, all of that comes back to the test pattern. It's really hard to look at content and judge without a test pattern, because what if one show or movie is intentionally extra soft? We see this a lot in dream sequences in movies, for example. So if you're adjusting your sharpness to that, and then something like BBC Planet Earth type stuff comes up, which is naturally very sharp, then you end up with all kinds of problems. So sharpness, super important control. It's one of the 4 most important controls. It's not as important compared to the other 3 as you think it might be, but it is important. So feel free, go to YouTube, stream the test pattern, make your adjustments, or you can download straight from the Murideo website. Any questions, guys, so far? Anything in the chat box or anything like that?
I had a quick one.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go ahead.
So with the Murideo software, that would allow you to control all of the patterns that you have loaded in there remotely from like your PC instead of clicking through, or? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It gives you like remote control of the generator. So, rather than, I do this, I'm sure Sammie does it too, but when I'm looking for a specific test pattern, I'm pushing the up and down button on the Murideo like 536 times until I find the test pattern I'm looking for. Yeah. And there really is no rhyme or reason to it. And then when you start importing your own test patterns, then it gets really confusing. So yeah, absolutely, Matt. That's a good use case for the softwares to be able to control everything remotely. Also too, you don't have to toggle through all of the submenus. So like it's all in tabs on the software. So like if you want to go into the resolution tab, you just click on that tab. If you want to go into the color timing tab, you go to that tab. So it's not like when you're controlling it manually by hand, you have to go to this sub menu and then you got to find this test pattern. Then you got to go to this sub menu and do this other thing. Yeah. You just do it like, a couple clicks of the mouse and you're good to go. And also too, you can read the more detailed EDIT information right there from that software as well. So very useful. Lots of cool uses for it. The analyzer has something very similar too.
Yeah, I was going to tell Sammie the pattern like this would be good because he's going to start doing reviews soon. I've been talking to him about cameras, and that would be good for him to align his camera, get the focus on it right, make sure there's no moire. Patterns like that work well for that.
And, I've done it before. There's a session I did on our YouTube channel. It's that session is about calibrating video walls. And
I saw that.
Yeah. And if you remember on that one, I was able to zoom in on the sharpness pattern pretty good. And you guys know how things work with cameras and internet streaming and monitors. Who knows what they're looking at? But it actually looked pretty decent on a not really that great camera. So, yeah, if you guys are doing that kind of stuff, that would be really cool. And, you know, while we're on the subject, I just do want to touch on one thing, because a lot of people don't know it exists, is the Overscan. So
Yes.
when a TV is sent from the manufacturer, they send it by default with something called Overscan turned on. So if you can imagine, the good example of this, I have a screenshot of it, but it'll take me too long to dig it up. But you guys may have seen this before, and maybe not, because depending on if you've ever had cable or not, or used an antenna or not, maybe you haven't seen this before. But if you're watching cable, for example, the screenshot I have is from an NFL game. And this happens all the time. It's just not CBS, but it was CBS. And across the very top of the picture was this like black and white speckly line that just kept moving. And it was only a few pixels tall. And we're not supposed to see that. And there's nothing wrong with the TV. There's nothing wrong with the cable box. It's actually coming from the broadcast. It's coming from the source. So if you've ever seen like a broadcast monitor before, or a reference monitor in a TV show environment or a movie environment, there's information above and below the picture that we're not supposed to see. But if somebody screws up, we end up seeing it. So a TV manufacturer doesn't want somebody to see something like that in a showroom, because average person thinks the TV's broken. So they'll intentionally zoom in on the picture, not much, 2%, 3%, something like that, to get rid of any anomalies or distortions that are around the edges of the image. So when you put in something that's really sharp and really high quality, like Blu-ray or 4K especially, here's the $1 million question, guys. If I take a picture with my smartphone and I zoom in on it, does it get more clear or less clear? Less. So when we zoom in on a picture, we're robbing ourselves of clarity and resolution. So one of the number one things I tell people, I have this whole list. I haven't like put it out there or anything yet, but I have this whole list I've been compiling and really thinking about. But 10 things I would recommend doing to your TV fresh out of the box. So, and one of them is turning off the overscan, because it's robbing you of resolution, and you can't really adjust sharpness correctly if the pixels aren't lined up correctly. So the number one thing with this test pattern is turn the overscan off, get the aspect ratio right, and then go ahead and adjust your sharpness. So I just did want to touch on that, just to let everybody know that if you're going to adjust your sharpness, don't do that until you make sure the overscan is taken care of.
Also, to comment on that, some of the TVs, if they have like an auto setting, they do it based on the resolution. So you might actually look at it and go, oh, auto looks fine. Just force it to be like off, overscan off, or just scan on, because it'll do for some sources and not others. So you might adjust something and then it just reverts back to the way it was. So you gotta be careful with that.
The easy example, the one that we see most commonly, is on the LG. So when you go into the aspect menu of the LG, it straight up says 16:9, and you're looking at a 16:9 screen, and you're thinking, okay, this must be right, because that's the setting and that's the aspect ratio of the screen. And then you put up the test pattern, and the tips of the diamond are chopped off. And you're like, okay, well, what's going on here? So you go one level deeper into that menu, and you have what you just called out perfectly is the just scan. And we want to turn that on. It's really funny, guys, because like I'm sure you've seen if you played with different manufacturers, but like they call it just scan, where some Sonys might call it pixel by pixel. You know, so it's like you just got to find it and figure out like what they mean, you know, because the name of the setting is not is definitely not standardized. And I see a note up on the screen that says always put your sharpness at 0. Not true. There are plenty of displays out there where if you go down to 0, the picture looks fuzzy. You have to be very careful with that. In some cases, I've got a couple of TVs in mind where the factory position of the sharpness control, it goes 0 to 100. It's right in the middle at 50. And if you go up, you start to get the ringing effect. If you go down, it starts to look fuzzy. So the factory default setting of 50 is the correct setting. So don't just go willy-nilly turning all your TVs down to 0 on sharpness, because you might end up screwing it up. But good call and good question from whoever that was.
Yeah, that's Tycho KG.
Oh, good. And this is, did you have another question, or I didn't know if you had something else?
Not that I see. I was going to say earlier that Sammie pretty much talked me into getting the 7, because my original plan was to get the 6 and then buy an NVIDIA Shield with a hard drive, put clips of movies and stuff. Yeah, it's way too complicated. So that's why I just went for the 7, so I can switch over to the 7 page.
You know, like I said, we built that machine to last a very long time. It's got a lot of horsepower in it, a lot of hard drive space we haven't even used yet. So there's a ton of stuff coming. Now, where this gets really interesting is not only do we have the ISF patterns in there, we have a bunch of Murideo test patterns in there. We have test patterns in there from a guy named Ryan Macciola. He makes a disc called Diversified Video Solutions. It is a wonderful disc. You can kind of put that on the same level as like the Spears and Munsell disc. So we have the Spears and Munsell test patterns, not all of them, but a few. We have the Diversified Video Solutions test patterns. We have test patterns from Greg Lowen. He runs the Professional Video Alliance. In total, we have about 1,100 test patterns for video analysis in that machine. So it is not a toy. Like it is, that's a very, very powerful, very robust instrument. And, you know, it's unfortunately, you know, it's not handheld, and it's kind of handheld, but it's not battery powered. It's got a little weight to it. So it's not exactly portable, but, you know, if you're calibrating a system, you're not running around with it. It's like sitting on your desk or your table right in front of you. So in that case, it's not a big deal. But where the manufacturers are going to use this is most likely going to be in a lab type environment. So, you know, we wanted to keep the cost somewhat reasonable, so we didn't make that little guy portable. And yeah, it looks like Cecil's on some of the test pattern pages right there. Also, another good point to bring up is the you guys familiar with Spicy Pixels? Does that ring a bell at all?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, good. So that's Tyler Pruitt, Phil Holland, Stacy Spears, a few other guys. They've come up with a bunch of really, really good high quality video clips, and there's 20 of them or so built into the 7G. Two of them specifically are 120 frames per second. One is a guy riding a bike down the side of a mountain, and it's just like super smooth, no distortion, no weird artifacts around him as he's moving, because it's native 120. There's also a 120 clip in there of some cars just driving by on a street, and there's like this one van, I think it's a plumber or something, and as that van drives by at 120 frames per second, you can still read the phone number on the side of the van. And you know, try to do that at 24, even 30, maybe even 60 frames per second, and you can't read that. I mean, you guys have seen before when there's a fast camera pan at 24 frames per second, it's super juddery. So at 60, and especially at 120, that stuff goes away. But we need to be able to evaluate the display to see how well it handles 120, and that's why we put that stuff in there. So
that one will do 120. Like, so like when I first got it, it'll do, the 7 will do 1080p 120.
Right.
And I'm not sure if it would do 1440p 120. I never tried that one. I know it will do 1080p 120 for sure.
Right.
But the main reason that I went with going from the regular 7 to the 8K one is just because now with HDMI 2.1 and all the game systems being 4K 120, yada yada yada, that's why I went up with that, because not only can you do 120, this comes with a sensor so that you can actually measure like the latency.
Right.
Like that's huge.
And you know, the old school way of doing that was, it wasn't bad, but we thought there'd be a better way. So the old way of testing latency is you'd have this little magic black box that had a light sensor on it, and you would go to a specific YouTube video, and the YouTube video would have a flashing light and a beep. So the device would see the flashing light and hear the beep, and then spit out in milliseconds what the latency is. That's not a bad way of doing it, especially if you're in an installer or calibrator type environment. But if you're in a lab, that's not good enough. We need the data down to like the exact millisecond. So and even microsecond in some cases, which that machine's capable of doing for some latency tests. So and Sammie, thanks for bringing that up, because I kind of forgot about it. But there's a small, we call it a visual probe. It's a little photodiode in a little black housing with a suction cup. So you stick that to the front of the screen of the display you want to measure, plugs into the 7G. And then also there's a little lapel style microphone that plugs into the 7G, and you put that near the speaker. So you start running some latency tests, and you can see exactly how much latency is there for the audio and for the video, and then for the total signal. Now it gets really crazy because you can do that in different formats. So there might be like more latency in, I don't know if this probably isn't true, but I'm just going to, as an example, there might be more latency in DTS versus Dolby, you know, or something like that. So if you're a manufacturer, like, you really need to know that stuff, because I'm not a big gamer, but I know most people listening to this probably are. And Cecil and Matt, I'm just kind of getting to know you guys, but I'm assuming you're gamers, right?
Yep.
So it's all about latency. So if you're a manufacturer and you're in this latency war with all the other manufacturers, you need that data to be extremely accurate. So that's exactly what it does. So not only are we testing the latency of a display, we can also test the audio latency of the ARC channel and the eARC channel too. So this is a tool used by the manufacturers to build the best TV or AVR or whatever product it is, the best that they can. Now, the good news is, I'm not going to talk about pricing here, but the good news is there's a similar product out there on the market that does something very, very, very similar. And it also comes with software, but it's not free. So for that piece of hardware, again, another like lab grade bench test type of machine, plus the software that I'll talk about in a minute that comes with the 7G for free, you're up in the like $70,000 to $80,000 range. And this is not even remotely close to that. So again, we wanted to build something that wasn't terribly expensive, but also very powerful and very helpful to the manufacturers out there. But lots and lots of stuff to talk about with this guy. But that's sort of the basics. It's Dolby certified for Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos, and lately we've got it all set up to go with DTS as well. So it's a very powerful machine that there's really not much it can't do. But the good news is, we own our factory. Our engineers are our employees. So, if somebody has a good suggestion, and this happens a lot, where somebody says, I wish it could do this. We go, holy crap, that's a good idea. Why didn't we think of that? And then, the next firmware update, we have it. So again, we built this product to last many, many, many years, and it has, I'm not going to say an infinite amount of upgrade potential, but definitely quite a bit. One thing I wanted to point out here, there is software for the 7 as well, which is 100% for free. You can download it from the website. So even if you don't have the machine, you can at least poke around with the software. But the software gets really crazy. There's something in there called a piece of software called the protocol analyzer. So that breaks up like the HDMI signal and all the protocols that make HDMI work. It breaks all that stuff down into microseconds. So if you pulse a signal out of the 7G into a display, you can see exactly when everything happened down to the microsecond, which is very, very, very helpful. And it's nothing that we would ever use in the field as an installer or integrator. But if you're a manufacturer, that is extremely important information. Again, this is to help a manufacturer build the best product possible. So being able to see stuff that detailed at that kind of level it's important. And without this machine and the software, a manufacturer has to spend at least $50,000 to get that kind of data, and we are nowhere even remotely close to that on pricing. So, yeah, good call. And I think Cecil, I think you were holding up the microphone and the little light sensor before. Yeah, it's super easy, very straightforward. There's ports for it in the back of the 7G. They're labeled. You plug them in, go to a certain menu on the 7G. It's about 2 button presses, and you're running latency tests almost immediately.
Yeah, and I was going to say the 8K version then is, as far as I know, the only consumer purchasable device that can measure 4K 120 hertz input lag, because Ratings had to build their own, and I've been like looking around for implementing that in my reviews.
Yeah, sure.
And there's just none out there. Like there's this guy that makes input lag testers with Raspberry Pis,
right?
But there's none that are HDMI 2.1 yet. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing else out there that can do that.
Yeah, I think I think those guys might have a 7G now. I can't remember. Most of the production houses have them. Almost, I mean, gosh, I can't think of a manufacturer that doesn't. In fact, we were at Infocom last week. Excuse me, and I just had to run to the restroom real quick. And you're walking by all the different booths and whatnot. I see a 7G on top of an AVR from a mile away, and I go, "Wait a second, what is that?" Because it wasn't our booth. So I walk over to the booth, and it's a guy who is making. This is actually really cool. I haven't seen one of these in real life yet, but I'm excited to. Not in an installation at least, but he makes these adapters that are about this big, and they convert HDMI to fiber. It's wild, and it's patented. He's kind of one of those wizard kind of guys, and he's by himself. He might have a few employees, but for him to test the latency and stuff that's introduced when that little device is used instead of a direct HDMI connection, he needs to know that so he can make the latency less or close to zero if possible. So it was really cool to be walking through a trade show and see a manufacturer that makes stuff in our world but still uses our tool. But again, all the major manufacturers have this thing. Disney has them, Netflix has them, and that. So Cecil's on the resources page right now on the 7G, and you see there's a ton of stuff there. One thing I think you guys might find super helpful here is the Hdr Calculator. So if you open that up, it goes to a website and gives you all of the different data rates for all the different signal formats. We also do have a format calculator as well. So you could type in, the resolution, the frame rate, the chroma, the bit depth, and it'll spit out the number for you, exactly how much bandwidth that's going to take up. So those resources are free. They're right there on the website. Feel free to use those for reviews or just for any any general information you might want to know about those formats, because it becomes very important when we start dealing. You go from 18 gigs to 48, and lots and lots of weird things can happen. So, so if you could swing back to that resources page on the 7G. And then if you go down a few clicks there under PC software, you have all the different software programs that we offer. Again, these are completely free. So the control software we mentioned before in the 6G, you can control the unit remotely, which is really nice, but you would need a long USB cable or a long serial cable. The 7G can go on a network. So let's just imagine that the 7G is like in a rack or in a completely different room. I can do the same thing as we sort of mentioned before with the AV Pro Edge matrix switches and whatnot. I just need the IP address of the 7G. I can go to any laptop, smartphone, tablet, anything with a web browser, and I can log into it, from that device. So I don't have to keep running back and forth from where I am to where it is. Below that is the device log software. This is something that the installers and the regular people out in the field would probably never use, but the device log, it's kind of like a key logger. It just shows you like what you've done to get to the point you're at. So like if you're running a real extensive test and it screws up, you can go back into Log Analyzer and see exactly what buttons you pushed to get there. So let's say you figure out like, oh, I shouldn't have done this at this time. You can now compile that information into a file, and you can send that to your coworkers and say, hey, here's how I did it to make the test work correctly. So it's a pretty powerful little tool, but nothing that I could see anybody in the field really using for anything. Below that's the protocol analyzer. That's the most powerful thing. I'm shocked that we don't charge money for this software. I talked about another example before where the hardware is about 60 grand. The software is like 20 or 30. We give the software away for free. And then below that is the audio uploader. If you want to, Sammie was mentioning before, uploading your own test patterns and whatnot. You can also upload your own video clips. Audio clips. So like, it's really easy to listen to test tones. I mean, right. But like, what about actual music or actual video or audio? I mean, so if I took like a snippet from a song or something, I could use it as an audio test tone as well. And then below that's the video uploader. So if you wanted to upload any custom test patterns or pictures or video clips, you can do it there. And to Sammie's point, uploading your own stuff can be very, very cool because, test patterns are test patterns, but what about real life actual like video? So, there might be a reference picture that, or hell, it could even be a picture of like your family or something, because you want to know, what the skin tones look like. So there's a lot of skin tone test images already in it, but if you wanted something that was like very specific to what you recognize, you can do that. And there's a lot of video clips out there. Florian Friedrich out of Germany, Tyler and Stacy with Spicy Pixels. There's a lot of different resources to get some really high quality video clips, and boom, you can upload them to the 7G right here with that piece of software. So lots going on here with the 7G, but again, it's a very, very, very powerful tool that, the super nerdy calibrators and integrators like us who are talking right now, it is a very, very cool toy. But again, it was mainly aimed for the manufacturers. It looks like a question came in.
Yeah. So in a ballpark, you can say that when you go from 60 hertz to 120 hertz, it cuts the input lag in half, but it's not always the case. Like the TCL 6 series, it's 15-ish milliseconds at 60 hertz, but then drops all the way to 5 at 120. Right. It disables additional processing and picture settings and so on. So it's dependent on a lot of different factors.
It depends on the manufacturer. It depends on how they implement it, how they want to do it. But one thing in general, just the general science of it, we're actually seeing less input lag with higher frame rates. And what I can think of off the top of my head is, I think like to your point, Cecil, something with processing. So let's just say, for example, I have 120 frames per second content, and the panel is a native 120 frames per second panel. The panel doesn't have to do any processing with the frame rate. It's native. So it does make sense if you think about it like that the latency is less when you're using a higher frame rate. But it could go the other way too. Like if you try to shove 120 into a panel that's 60, the panel has to interpolate it down to 60, which is more processing, which is more latency. So, but it's kind of a blanket statement, but it can't be, because again, the manufacturers, there's no standard way of doing this. So if LG wants to do it this way, TCL wants to do it that way, Sony wants to do it that way, that's up to them. But the point is you can use the machine to test the input lag and to test exactly what's going on. So yeah, good question. Hopefully that answers it. If not, feel free to follow up. Another product that we'll talk about, which I use in the field all the time. If we go up to the products page, there is a Murideo test monitor. This thing is awesome. I have one of these in my calibration toolkit constantly. So actually, you know what? If you scroll down a little bit, that's the video I was talking about. Oh no, that's the product video. So this is a little test monitor. It can be portable. It does have a slot in the back for a battery. And the nice thing is we didn't want to make some weird proprietary battery that might not ever be manufactured one day. We wanted to go with something that's very widely available. So there's a very, very, very common battery for Sony cameras. It's been around forever. It's going to be available forever. So you can connect one of those Sony batteries to this little monitor, and now it's portable. So the cool thing about this monitor is it has some of the analyzer functions built in, like with the Fox and Hound analyzer and with the 6A analyzer. So there's a button right on top. There's a few buttons right on top, but one of them is an info button. So if I have a signal going into this little test monitor, and yeah, I get a picture, that's great. That means a picture's getting to the little monitor. But if I hit the button on top that for the info, it'll tell me kind of like what the analyzer in the other kit tells me. It'll tell me frame rate, whether HDR is there or not, what the bit depth is, if HDCP is there or not, if it is, what version of HDCP. So lots of valuable information on this little test monitor. So again, just like think of a situation where you're installing a system, the TV doesn't show up till tomorrow, but you're trying to get everything else done. Yeah. You can toss that monitor, right where the TV is going to go, and you can at least make sure your infrastructure and all your sources and whatnot are set up correctly. That way, when the TV does get there tomorrow, you can unbox it, plug it in, you know that everything's going to work. So a very, very handy tool. The other thing I'll mention too, eventually when I build a rack at home, I'm going to do this because I think it's not only really cool, but yeah, there is we do also make this in a dual configuration. So there's two next to each other and it's rack mountable. So imagine you have this rack. Dude, that thing is so sick. And it's something so simple, but still really cool. We have it in our rack over here, which you guys will see here down in Florida in January. But you can set it up a few different ways. You can monitor the outputs of the rack. You can monitor the inputs of the sources. So the way I have it set up here, I'm just monitoring the input of the sources. So the inputs are going into the monitors, and then the monitors have a loop out to go into the rest of the system. So if I'm on the other side of the room and I get no picture on the TV in the room that I'm in, I can peek back at the rack. And if there's still picture on the rack, I know the source is okay. So you can do it in a million different ways. You can monitor the outputs if you want to. So I think it's just a really cool little thing. And, you guys have seen plenty of racks and stuff, throughout the years. And there's nothing cooler to me than a really well done rack. And once you start throwing some monitors in there with good wire management, and trust me from experience, guys, it's so much easier to troubleshoot AV systems when you have these test monitors and you have good wire management in your rack. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I've shown up to help troubleshoot a job and the rack is a disaster. And you end up it's just a really frustrating situation to be in. So dress your racks, do it properly. There is a right and wrong way to do it. I've seen racks before that were wired correctly, but managed very poorly. So for example, they had a bunch of signal cables zip tied to a bunch of power cables and it looked nice, but that can cause a lot of major headaches. So the other thing and the last thing we'll look at today is the Hdbaset Tester. So if we go back up to the products page, there should be one that says something about Hdbaset. That little guy, I think that's it right there. Yep, there it is. Ooh, old picture. There's a new interface that looks really cool and sleek. But this is what we call the MS Test Pro. We made this with a company called Media Solutions. Hdbaset is a standard. And just in case anybody's not familiar with Hdbaset, Hdbaset figured out a way to get audio and video signals up to 100 meters. So you can imagine a 100-meter HDMI cable probably going to have issues with that. In fact, what we recommend as a manufacturer and what we hear constantly from people in the field is HDMI gets really flaky over about 4 meters. So a common example of how to make that cable longer is to use a Hdbaset extender. So it's a receiver on one side, a transmitter on the other side. In fact, actually, I've got one right here. So this is an example. Oh yeah. So we've got a a transmitter and a receiver. So imagine the transmitter is over in the rack, and you've got HDMI going into the transmitter, and then you have a 100 meter, up to 100 meter category cable, like Cat 6A, for example, running, through the attic and whatnot, and, down to the TV. Then you have a receiver. So the receiver converts that back into HDMI, and you plug into the TV. So it's a very, very cool concept for Hdbaset. And the nice thing is, it's just a standard 6A category cable. So you can terminate your own. You can buy one pre-terminated, and it's category cable. So, if you have any problems with the cable itself, it's easy and inexpensive to replace. So in a lot of cases, somebody might install Cat 5 cable, which used to be okay for this stuff. It's not really okay anymore. Maybe they terminated the category cable with those RJ45 easy ends, which is a huge no-no in the AV world. Okay for emails, okay for stuff like that, but not okay for high bandwidth video. Maybe there's a kink in the cable somewhere. Who knows? There's a million different things. So you'll notice in the bottom of that machine, there's these little modules that you slide in and out, and there's multiple tests you can run with that device. So if you want to test Hdbaset, for example, there's a transmitter module that pops in, and then the receiver module, which is kind of in that picture on top, that goes on the other end. So I can now test the category cable to make sure that it can handle high bandwidth video signals with the Hdbaset standard. Because otherwise, people are using like a continuity tester, which is okay because it tells you that something is coming through. But again, what we're looking at with a continuity tester and what we look at with the Hdbaset is two totally different things. So another cool thing about that is, like, if in the world of really big installations, whether it's a super high-end home theater, or I should say distributed home video system, or maybe it's a business or a stadium that has hundreds and hundreds of Hdbaset runs. What I really like about this tool is you can certify every single one of those runs, and it spits out a report that says, hey, this cable's been tested. Here's some numbers. Here's some graphs. This cable is certified. It's good to go. So you can go through and you can make 100 reports for not only your Hdbaset category cable, but also your HDMI cables, which, by the way, holy crap, I did not even mention, with the Fox and Hound and the Murideo 6A, 6G, one of the most common uses for those tools are testing HDMI cables for bandwidth and make sure they're actually okay. But you can do that with this machine as well. So you have this stack of paperwork at the end that you can give to the customer or to the project manager or to whoever, and you can say, here's this stack of paperwork. We tested every single cable in this system. It's all here. It's all documented. You can email it. You can email those reports straight to the customer or whoever from the machine. It can do a lot of really cool things. And again, just like kind of with the other products we kind of breezed through today, that just kind of scratches the surface. That's a very, very, very powerful tool for somebody who's working in the field with Hdbaset.
How many rack units is that dual monitor?
Oh gosh, you had to ask.
It looks like 3, maybe 4.
Yeah, it's not more than that for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not more than that. Cool. What do we got? Any questions? Or I've got a few more minutes. I can hang out.
Yeah. So I only got to use the 7 so far once, and it was to run through this TCL 6 series. And
oh, sure.
So first wanted to say that I think it's great over having the Raspberry Pi, which I was using before.
A little bit of a difference.
Kalman doesn't have a thing with TCL yet.
Right.
So it just really made it a lot easier to just run my full sweep of everything.
Sure.
And something that it helped me figure out was because this has Dolby Vision, HDR, HLG, like these lights light up to tell you what the pattern is.
Yeah.
When I was trying to run the sweeps on HDR on the TCL, don't know why it would not switch the color gamut when it was on auto. So it was staying in 709, and I'm taking gamut measurements and it's reading 50 something %.
Right.
Like, what is going on? And this is showing that it's in HDR, so I know the pattern's right.
So what you're telling me is I need to call TCL and sell them a 7G.
Yeah, because as soon as I switched it off of auto into native, then it was, as it should be, 70 something %.
But that's the point. I mean, imagine, Cecil, if you didn't have that tool or any tools for that matter, how would you know? How would you figure this out and how to fix it? I mean, it would be guesswork. And not that you would do this, but somebody else might be on the phone with 1-800-TCL and be like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. And those folks on that side of the on the other end of that phone are not technical people at this level. I mean, they're there to, hey, the TV won't turn on. What do I do? They're there for like the average consumer. I've called Sony before. Maybe Sammie's had this experience, but I've called Sony before with some really weird like white balance issues on a certain TV, and you know the response I get from them. Maybe I shouldn't have said the name, but that's okay. The response I get from them is, "Oh, you don't need to do the white balance. It's fine from the factory." So, you know, my point is that, you know, without the tools, you would never know this stuff. So in that case, Cecil, you may have been watching like HDR and stuff. Yeah, it may have been HDR. It may have said HDR on the flag on the TV, but you could have been watching HDR 709 without even realizing it, unless you said, wait a second, those colors look a little washed out for being HDR, like P3. What's going on here?
And it wouldn't have been fair in the review if I said that HDR is measuring delta airs in the 60s.
Which is why reviewers for the longest time since the 90s have been calibrating. Sound and Vision has done it since the 90s. And we see it now. Like every reviewer now calibrates, I feel like. And it's almost like if you aren't calibrating, or you at least don't take some measurements and look at some test patterns, you know, we got guys like you guys out there right now who are just doing smoking killer reviews because you have the tools. So I love it. I love that you guys are getting into this. And Cecil, I think I said this in New York to you, but I'm like one of the youngest guys that's in this game. And you know, I started very young. I was in my early to mid 20s when I started getting this deep into it. And there's a lot of guys that are getting into it now, but most of our industry, for the most part, they're older people, which, you know, great, but I love the fact that I'm seeing some of the younger guys come in and really embrace this stuff, because honestly, man, we had like this lull for a few years where it was like, Sammie, how boring did 1080p get after 5, 6, 7, 8 years?
It's pretty boring, but I would almost say that it's almost as boring now, with the exception of the panels change just enough every few years to make it exciting.
Sure. And God, I mean, we could sit here and talk for days about how crappy panels used to be. I mean, awful. And the early ones either wouldn't have white balance at all, or it would be buried in the service menu where you have to go in and you know, potentially brick the TV just to get to the white balance. So just to see, like, of course, every year they're getting better and better. But you know, if you compare what we're doing now to what we were doing even in like 2010, you know, it feels like back then we were like cavemen hitting the TV with a rock, you know, and now with the tools and the software, it's just like it is as easy as it seems. The process to make that easy is not easy. So, you know, to do all this stuff automated and to do all this auto cal stuff with certain manufacturers, like that took years and years and years of work. And I think you guys, the young guys, are really, really embracing that, because Cecil, if you could knock out maybe 2, 3, 4 reviews in a day, you know, a reviewer from 10 years ago can only do 1 or 2 a day, because all this calibration stuff had to be done all manually. So it's really helped the efficiency of the calibrators and the reviewers and the testers. So I'm glad you guys are enjoying it and getting good use out of it. Looks like another question came in.
Yep. KG's asking what your favorite TVs are this year and what's your overall favorite.
Yeah. So it's funny because my view on this almost lined up exactly with what we saw at the shootout. So personal opinion, the shootout to me wasn't a surprise with who won and whatnot. But here's what I've always said. I've said this since the Sony A1E, the first OLED, well, the first consumer OLED that time, because Sony did OLED way back, but then they abandoned it for a few years. But anyway, I always tell this to people, friends, family, people who reach out, say, hey, what TV do I buy? You know, and that's a very hard question to answer, because I don't know your room. I don't know what you watch. I don't know, you know, I don't know if you game or not. I don't know, you know, there's so many different questions, right? But if it comes down to a conversation of the high-end TVs, especially, and assuming the room is under control, lighting wise and whatnot, I always say, if you have Sony money, get the Sony, hands down. The latest OLED that won the shootout, that TV was incredible. I mean, I was a judge on that for that shootout, and you know, I'm like this close to the screen trying to find artifacts and stuff, and on high quality content, it just I'm telling you, man, it just wasn't there. And it was barely there for streaming, which is one of the reasons why I love the Sony so much. The processing in it, if your source sucks, the processing in the Sony is very, very, very good. But if you don't have Sony money, I totally understand. Get the LG. Guess what I have at home? I have an LG. Guess what? The TV I work on the most here when I'm testing things and stuff, it's the LG. I really do feel like the LG is an excellent value. Now, the upscaling's not as good as the Sony. The motion processing is not as good as the Sony. But at the end of the day, if you're looking at 4K HDR on a Sony and 4K HDR on an LG, and you cover up the logos of the TVs so you don't know which one is which, and the source is good and the content is good, it's really, really hard to see a difference. But if you stream something, or maybe you look at a feed from a cable box on both of those, the Sony has an obvious advantage. And then of course you have all of your budget brands like the Hisenses of the world, the TCLs of the world. And I got to tell you, man, like they sent me a TCL years ago. It was a P605. It was one of their first, if not their first, Dolby Vision TV. So they sent it to me for a bunch of testing and stuff. And I got to say, and this was 4 or 5 years ago, that little TV was very impressive for the price at the time. And I really see them making a lot of strides now with mini LED and stuff. I haven't got my hands on one of the 8 series yet, but just what I've read and heard about it, it seems like very, very promising. And then we saw the Hisense dual cell at the shootout, the 2-layer LCD, which is still very expensive, but it'll come down just like anything else. And that was impressive. To the average person, if they looked at the Hisense next to an OLED, and Sammie, you're familiar with a lot of those shots from the Spears disc where it's like these really bright, vivid objects with a perfectly black background. Yeah. The Hisense had extremely respectable blacks because of that dual layer technology.
And it's going to have the brightness that's going to pull them in.
Oh, it rips. I mean, that thing was, I mean, I don't remember the exact number, but as far as overall brightness goes, it destroyed the OLED, and the blacks were almost as good, and the motion wasn't bad. So, that might be a promising technology, regardless of the manufacturer. The hard part right now is getting the cost down. The other hard part too, I know this sounds so stupid, to me especially, I don't care so much about how thick the TV is or the bezel.
Yeah, you don't watch the TV from the side.
Right. But what is one of the main things we've heard over the years? People get so turned on by how thin the TV is, and I get that, especially if you grew up with CRT. But the issue is right now the dual layer LCD is like 10 times thicker than an OLED. The dual layer LCD is like this. So, people are turned off by the weight, the price, the size, the thickness, and a few other things. But I'm telling you, man, I mean, I remember selling $40,000 plasmas that were 480p back in 2001. And, look at what happened with those. Yeah, let me just touch on one more thing, and then I've got to bolt out of here. I was talking with Joel Silver this morning, and Sammie, you remember seeing the crystal LED wall from Sony at some of the trade shows?
Yes, I do.
Awesome. They stop the FOMO. How are you, man? Yeah, I know it was funny with that event. There was still a lot of people, and we were indoors and stuff, so I was still being a little cautious. Plus, I had just got my second shot, so yeah, we're pretty much now at some of the trade shows and stuff. We're still wearing them, but those days are starting to fizzle out, I feel like. So, but yeah, great to see you here, and I'm glad you made it. So the crystal LED wall at 16 feet wide was $1.4 million up until now. They've got it now down to about 800 grand. So I know that's still a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but you're talking 16 feet wide, 1,000 nits, perfect black. I mean, it's
amazing.
If you haven't seen one in person, it is jaw dropping. I mean, it's
impressive.
Wild. I mean, you're not used to seeing something that big, that immersive with perfect black. We've seen that big and that immersive before in the theater, but you've never seen black in a movie theater, and you've never seen good color saturation in a movie theater unless you're lucky enough to live near any of the Dolby Vision theaters. They do a really good job.
Do you remember? I think it was CEDIA 2018.
Yeah, Denver.
Yes.
Or no, that was San Diego.
That was San Diego. So
shit. No, that was San Diego.
Yeah. So it was right when they released the Master Series of the LCD and the OLED.
Yeah.
So anyways, at their booth, they had the Cletus, so the crystal LED. And the way they had it set up is not only did it automatically take care of the aspect ratio, they were able to display something in the aspect ratio was 2:4:1. But when they wanted to, they cut the screen to be 16:9.
Exactly.
And then they separated into 4 or 5 different sections, different sources on each panel.
Yeah. Yeah. So
it's super impressive. It really is.
The question going forward, especially in that realm, is not how big of a TV do you want, is how big is your wall? Because you could easily be watching 2 football games, having your security camera down in the corner, have your email open in another corner. When you have that much real estate to work with, I mean, the options are unlimited. And I want to touch on one more thing, and then I got to book out of here. Of course, I'll stick around for a few more questions, but this is the last thing I'll rant about. One of the best things that you can do for picture quality is make the room as dark as you can, whether that's closing the windows or going to Walmart and get some of those eclipse curtains. Those are awesome and they're not very expensive at all. If you're in a position where you can paint the wall behind the TV or the display, go with like a dark gray or go with black is ideal. When you're watching an OLED or an LED LCD or a crystal LED with really, really good blacks, and the wall behind the TV is black and you're in a dark environment, guess what happens when you watch a 235 or a 240 movie? There are no black bars. They don't exist.
It floats.
It floats. It's so good. And when you're watching 4:3 content, guess what? There's no bars on the sides. Mm-hmm. So imagine a situation where I do this. I love old Twilight Zone episodes. So I'm in a black room. I do have a bias light behind the TV. And I do have a black wall behind the TV, and the wall's like this out to a certain point or black. So when I watch something like Twilight Zone, it's perfect gray. I have no visible bars, and it looks like the image is like floating in midair. It's freaky cool. So something you can do to improve your system without going and spending a bunch of money. Maybe it's not necessarily upgrading your TV or rearranging the room and sitting closer and all that kind of stuff. That's all fine and dandy, but make the wall behind your TV dark and you'll thank me later. It's a huge improvement.
Unless you have wood panels like this and you're
you're correct, but you don't have to paint. You can buy some black velvet, you can buy some duvetine, you can get some speaker cloth material, and you can just, especially wood, you can use some thumbtacks.
Yep. Last time I had a projector and I was renting, I just got black sheets and just stapled it to the walls and the ceiling.
Yeah. And if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. I mean, you got to remember, this is a very fun hobby and a very, very fun job. So, if you don't have the budget to go out and build a, $900,000 theater, then, normal people like us have to live within our means. So I'm kind of in a similar situation. I'm renting, and I used black duvetine / velvet type material behind mine, and it's great. It's a really good fix. So any other questions rolling in or anything? I got a couple more minutes.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So for those that are, I guess 2 questions. For those that are interested in getting into things like calibration, where do you think the best starting point is? Because I mean, obviously there's a lot of do-it-yourself. There's a lot of tutorials. There's a lot of you remember old Kurt Palmy.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of stuff like that.
Right.
Where do you think a good place for them to start is? And then for those that are interested in it, do you suggest that they do take things like the ISF course?
That's like step 5, honestly. Step 1 is learn your TV inside and out. Know where everything is, what every setting does, what every picture mode does. Learn the TV inside and out. Coming to an ISF class is going to give you the fundamentals on how to adjust the TV, but if you don't know what the adjustments are in the TV, you're already way ahead of yourself. So number 1, I would say get very intimate with your display or displays. You can all attest for this who are with me right now, but what LG does with their menu is totally different than what Panasonic does with their menu, which is totally different than what LG does with their menu. So get very intimate, know all the menus, know all the picture modes. Number 2, I would say to get a disc, or if you don't have a player, download some files. So like the Spears and Munsell disc is kind of my go-to. The Diversified Video Solutions disc is awesome. But what I love about Ryan's disc is that it doesn't have to be a physical disc. He has those files downloadable, so you can toss them onto a thumb drive.
I have that.
It's so good. And his tests are really interesting because they're very, very, very specific. So like just a quick example, my first OLED that I bought with my own money was a 55C7 in 2017, which had Dolby Vision, but there was no AutoCal or anything in those days. So I needed specific Dolby Vision test patterns for the LG. So, and it didn't exist, but guess what Ryan had on his disc? He had test patches for 2017 LG OLEDs to calibrate Dolby Vision. So He's very clever at certain things like that. I really enjoy talking to him. In fact, I just did a webcast with him like 2 weeks ago talking about test patterns and stuff. So feel free to check out that YouTube channel. Now from there, get intimate with your TV, know what all the adjustments are, get yourself a disc or some files, then learn how to adjust the TV. So like if you have the disc, like great, what do you do with it? So you have to be able to know what to do with the contrast test pattern, the brightness test pattern, the aspect ratio test pattern, and all those different things. And then once you get to that point, and I'll tell you this from experience, I've taught hundreds of these classes. If you show up to class and you already understand or have a fundamental understanding of how all this stuff works, the class is not difficult at all. You pretty much breeze through it. I have a feeling that's going to happen with Cecil and Matt when they come here to Florida to visit. But there's a massive difference between that and somebody who shows up just because they thought it'd be cool. There's a massive learning curve if you're not already at least a little bit familiar.
One thing I noticed when I did my level 3, so I took this class 3 times. Like I took it once a long time ago, and I never got my certification. Yeah. And I thought I needed to take it. I thought I needed to have my certification to get my level 3. So I went and took the level 1 again, and then I went and took level 3. But anyway, so I took the level 3, and honestly, the majority of the people that are in there are like colorists. They work in post-production. They're like engineers, like actual like calibrators. Right. And I don't want to say actual calibrators, but like people that do it like independently. Yeah. It's few and far between. And I already knew a lot of it when I went in there. So I was pretty much going in there and helping other people. Sure. Yeah. Understand. I've seen you do it. Yeah. Yeah. It's not super difficult, but if you already have a good understanding of it, you will go through it. And it's just going to be like, oh, it either confirms what you already knew or believed, it reinforces it. And then you just help other people. You can't take algebra without pre-algebra, right? Like it's a requirement. Right. So with that being said, I'll leave you guys with this. If you really want to get a little more deep into it without sort of learning on your own and sort of just playing and guessing and whatnot, we do have the ISF Level 1 course now online. It's 11 modules, work at your own pace. There's little quizzes after the modules. If you get some questions wrong, it kind of goes back and helps you understand what you got wrong, and you can re-answer. The cool thing about it is, again, it's all online. It's at your own pace. It's through CEDIA, and you don't have to be a CEDIA member to take it. And that gets you ISF Level 1 certified, which means that you understand the fundamentals, and the fundamentals being like red, green, and blue are what make white. And mixing red, green, and blue gives us different shades of gray and different colors and whatnot, and how the human eye works and different, differences between the display technologies. So if you're willing to make a little bit of investment in time and money, it's not a lot, but you can go through the Level 1 course through CEDIA. And that way, if somebody does decide to come do Level 2 and Level 3, you come into it like already knowing what you need to know. Now you can use what you learned in Level 1 to do the hands-on stuff in Level 2 and 3. So
if you can just answer this one question real quick. Sure. Darius has an A80J. He got the VideoForge Pro, couldn't get Dolby Vision stuff really to work well with Kalman Home. He got a 6G. Is there anything he can do about CMS with Dolby Vision with the 6G and Kalman Home, or does he need Ultimate or? Yeah,
honestly, I wouldn't touch it. And here's why. When you're doing standard dynamic range, like normal SDR stuff, that's what the color management is really designed to manipulate. So when you start pushing the TV to its outer limits, like with HDR and Dolby Vision, and you start making even tiny adjustments to the color management, it all falls apart. Yep. So my recommendation for HDR and Dolby Vision is to typically just get the white balance under control, and wherever the primaries and secondaries land, that's where they land. But what you might want to at least consider, just because it might be something really simple in just a few clicks, but you might want to consider just touching up the hue control for like the secondary colors, just making sure that the cyan dots in cyan, the magenta dots in magenta, the yellow dots in yellow. But if you're starting to go more than like 1, 2, 3 clicks on CMS in Dolby Vision or HDR, put it back and just don't worry about it. Yeah. Or auto cal it with a LUT. That's the ultimate way to do it. But not everybody has the time, patience, or software to do it. Yep. So, okay, guys, I got to run. Thanks a lot. I'm happy to do these with you guys as much as you want. I mean, this is super fun to me. So thank you guys for the invite. And I'm sure I'll talk to you before then, but I will see Cecil and Matt in Florida in January, it looks like. So I'm happy to meet you guys in person. Well, Cecil I met in New York, but Matt I haven't met in person yet.
We'll see you there. So, I got friends in Tampa. It'll be fun.
Oh, good. Well, hey, we'll probably end up doing a dinner or something, or going and seeing what there's a lot of fun stuff to do around here. So
like I said, I'm making a week trip out of it. So
good. Guys, do I need to do anything to log off, or can you log me off?
You just hit leave studio at the bottom.
Okay, cool. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you.
Right.
See you next time.
Cool. See you, Jason.
All right. So KG, I would just say it doesn't matter. Get as big as you can. So I normally would say 1 foot for 10 inches, but I mean, I'm 3 feet from 48, and at that, like, it's still not too big. So if you can get a 150-inch projector screen at 7 feet, I'd do it.
I saw the 83 A90J at like 3 feet away, and it was still sharp as hell. I'm not worried about like, you sit too close, it's going to look soft, or you're not going to see pixels. It's still going to look good.
He's been toying with getting an ultra short throw. I'm trying to talk him into a regular projector. So I think he said that he's got like 12-ish feet, I think you said, KG, to work with. So, I would say get like 100 to 120 something cinescope screen with a regular projector. If you're going to get into projectors, that's what I would do.
Yeah, I mean, for distance, I would say get as large as your wall would support, where it's still comfortable. And also like with your surroundings, right? Because is it going to be wall mounted? Is it going to be on like a TV stand? But when it comes to projectors, I mean, I sit 10.5 feet away from a 135-inch scope screen and it's basically almost my entire wall, minus like about 2.5 feet on each side, and it's totally fine. But if you get too big, it might be uncomfortable. I would say like 9 feet away, 77, 80 inches is good. If you're going projection, do 100, 120.
Yeah, KG, I sent you an invite if you just want to jump in. You can't mount the projector in the room, but I think if you just got like a shelf and sat it on it, but because you can get a pretty high shelf that can go over your head, and it doesn't have to be inverted, right?
Well, on projector. It depends on what projector he's getting. Yeah. If he gets a long throw, because if he gets like one of the less expensive long throw projectors, a lot of those do not have a vertical lens shift.
Correct.
So he will have, and he shouldn't keystone. So he would have to have the projector mounted or placed on a shelf where it's going to throw correctly to the screen. Now, say for instance, he gets like an Epson, those actually have a limited amount of vertical lens shift. It's generally between about 15 to 20 degrees, but that's max on like those until you start getting into like home cinema projectors that start at around say 4,500. Then you're going to have a lot of vertical and horizontal lens shift, and he has more placement options.
He just has to realize that the lens is going to be basically perpendicular with the edge of the screen. So if he's sitting on a table and it's above his head, then the screen on the wall is going to be starting at like eye level if it doesn't have that lens shift ability. So you have to be really careful with that.
Yeah, I was saying he should, because he's just talking about getting something to start with. So I was saying the Epson
50
yeah,
50 be good.
I'm thinking a few years ago when I was looking at them, but the 50 is a UB.
It's a 5040 UB was the old one, the
5050 UB, and then there's a 6050 UB. And then I think that's where they top out at.
Yeah, and he's looking at 75 to possibly 85-inch TVs, but it's got to go upstairs. So I think the only way he's going to really get something big up the stairs is if it's a projector. And then he was looking at like the Hisense ultra short throw, but that comes as a 100-inch hard screen and a giant box, so that's not going upstairs.
Another option is if he does an ultra short throw, he could always go with the Optoma. Was it like the Cinemax P1 or P2?
I hear the Samsung
makes one. Samsung makes one, and if he does that, then he can get a pull down screen. For instance, he can mount it on the wall and pull it down when he wants to use it.
Yep. And you could get a low gain screen for an ultra short throw to help the blacks.
Well, you need a specific screen for the ultra short throws so that they reflect the light properly.
Yeah.
And you can't cheap out on those, because what ends up happening is if they don't, handle that angle or reflection correctly, you get light bleed all around the screen, and that gives you the opposite of the effect that you want, because now you've got basically halo around the screen in a dark room. It just makes it look a lot worse.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you gotta be careful with that.
In my experience, depending on who you pair with the screen, so say for instance, if you get an Elite screen that's a Cinegray and you're using an Optoma, it's going to be biased towards green. So you kind of want to, if you can, get a white screen. Don't go like Cinegray, because one, white is the most accurate and neutral. If you do an ALR screen, it's going to help your contrast, but your whites are going to be off. And when your whites are off, then all your colors are slightly off. And sometimes they will push, all projectors are biased towards one color or another. Like Sony's are biased towards red, JVC's are biased towards green, Optoma's biased towards green. So when you pair those with certain types of screens, you can see it more. So I would say whatever you get a low gain screen, like maybe like a 0.8. But if you can avoid a Cinegray, I would say avoid it unless you absolutely need it.
Yeah. Another thing I ran into too was, being on a budget back then, I started with this one, I can't remember, I want to say it was like Silver Ticket, I think, and it had like this really bad hot spot, like not in the middle, but like just shifted off of the middle. It was really large. And then like another one had like where the pixel grid would be, they would like sparkle and shine sometimes. So you can run into a lot of just screen problems too if it's not a decent screen. I ended up getting an Elite screen, just white, 120-inch, tension tab frame that you build. I think it was like $250, and then that one worked out great with the Sony projector that I had. And I just put an ND filter over the Sony projector to darken the blacks.
Yeah, Elite screen works well. Like, they're not bad screens. I have seen a little bit of hot spotting with a few Elite screens and some JVC projectors, but those were high gain screens. I don't think I've ever seen any off of like a Unity gray or like a Unity gain, like just 1.0. I've never seen it.
Avoid that Optima screen that gets packaged in with their little cheapy short throw, because I saw really bad hot spotting on that one. So I can't recommend that combo. I don't know if they still sell it, but it was through Best Buy's website. It was a 100-inch Optima combo projector thing.
Yeah, and I don't think the Samsung comes with a screen, so you'd have to find one that works well with it, but I don't think it's that expensive either.
I wanted to talk about the reason I was buying the actual pattern generator, like versus just like do it yourself and all this other stuff. But man, Jason, was just on a roll. So we might have to do that some other time, but it basically comes down to the fact that I can't get a accurate source for an image that I can rely on by using USB here, disk here, mobile forge, laptop HDMI output. There's so many different ways you get to get an image on the screen, and you can't trust it.
Yeah, there's a lot of variants.
Yeah, literally could not even get a word in.
I know. That's all right.
Because like the biggest selling point for these pattern generators isn't everything they can do. It's literally your alternative options out there. So
yeah, like I said, that I've only got to use it once, but that helped last night with the TCL the other night. Why are all of these HDR sweeps so bad? It shouldn't be that bad.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be doing 50% color gamut. And then found out it was just the TV wasn't switching the gamut automatically.
You see that a lot. And like the image I was trying to share earlier was like a perfect use case for his mobile monitor, because I'll see if I can find the image again. I basically did a rack upstairs in a house to the living room that was downstairs. And to get from the living room to the area where the rack was, you literally walk backwards across the house, up the stairs, then back across the house. It was a huge house. Then back over to the bedroom closet where the rack was. And you can't do any of the adjustments for these receivers or pre-pro at the rack. You have to have a screen. So I ended up dragging a monitor to the screen and hooking it up all this other stuff, but you can't tell if you're even getting the signal correct. So like that thing was badass. I didn't even know they made that. That's the first time I've seen it.
Yeah, no, I've seen that little mini monitor, and I saw, because I get all the Murideo emails, and I saw that dual rack monitor, and I don't need it. There's no reason. I have nothing that I can even use it for.
Yeah.
Everything is in the same room, but it would be so cool to have like 2 monitors in the rack. That'd be cool.
Well, if I was still integrating, like the biggest thing I thought of is we put an 83-inch A90J downstairs, right? To actually do that, you have to hook up the TV to power. You have to plug in the HDMI signal. Generally, you have to mount the TV if the HDMI cables are short. Where with that, you could just hook up the monitor, test the cables, and if you have to rerun the cables, you rerun the cables. Like it's really brilliant for installers, I would say.
Yeah, no, it is. It really is. And it's battery power too. That's huge.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Yeah, I know Vincent really likes the Panasonic OLEDs too, but I think he preferred last year's over this year, but just that they have better near black handling out of the box.
Yeah, I mean, we're all from the U.S. I don't think any of us have had a chance to actually look at it. We can just read specs online, like,
or watch their reviews.
Yeah, watch other reviews.
Yeah.
I did a 65 A90J on Friday last week. And one of the test examples was we were streaming Dune over HBO Max. And I was amazed at how well that TV handled that content. Like it looked amazing, like no artifacts. And we were like 3 feet from the screen.
Yeah, so burn-in a sense is inevitable. It's just a matter of when. So it could be, 8 to 20,000 hours, who knows? But it's going to be a very, very long time. So as long as there's no specific static elements that are there in the content you're watching all the time, and it's not being, or it's being varied a lot, then it shouldn't be an issue. It's just how many years do you want to have the TV? If you're someone that buys a TV every 5 to 10 years, then maybe just go ahead and look at a LCD. But otherwise, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
I mean, with that,
also depends where you get it too, because you can get a warranty that might cover it through like Best Buy.
Yeah, or just get a G1, get the 5-year warranty. Depends on your budget.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't want to worry about babying it too much, just every 5 hours, take a 10-minute break and turn the TV off. It'll do its comm cycle. So if you're watching 16 hours a day, that gives you 1 comm cycle per day, right? If you turn the TV off 2 times per day every 8 hours, now you have 3 compensation cycles per day. So you just tripled the amount of protection on the screen. Yeah. So just turn it off 10 minutes or so. Yeah. And you're good.
Yep. So KG, I guess, made his choice. So he's been going back and forth on stuff for a while. He just ended up with what I have. So for about the same price I paid too.
Nice.
It's a good choice though.
Yep.
I think that's honestly like,
he's not gaming on it. He's going to be gaming on his 48C1. So
no, even with
same setup. Literally.
No, even with gaming, like I honestly, after playing with all these Sonys over the last week, I think I'd be 100% fine with a 77-inch A80J. 100%. I say that confidently. I don't use Dolby Vision gaming. There's rarely stuff that I'm using at 120. Apparently, the new firmware has helped with a lot of the posterization and banding issues for actual HDR gaming. You still haven't looked at it. But in terms of how they calibrate, like they come out really, really good, and they look really, really good. So
the only reservation I would say for you is you play enough Destiny. I know it would bother you when it's
you haven't tested it yet. Go test it.
It has nothing to do with the dimming.
Oh, the dimming.
Yeah, the dimming in Destiny.
Yeah. I mean, I play it reference. So
one thing with Sony's, and so something that a lot of people don't realize is that Sony didn't have a 10-point until I think it was 2016. You didn't have a 20-point until 2018. You didn't have a CMS until 2018. So everything that Sony's ever done with their colorimetry has always been by engineering and math. Mm-hmm. So they're really good out of the box. I'm not going to say they're 100% accurate, but they're really, really good. So the point that when you do calibrate them, they come out really well. You don't have the ability to put a LUT. You could put a LUT box in front of it and use it for like SDR, but I mean, it doesn't really need a LUT though either.
Do you have a LUT box? Or is there one you recommend, like a price range? Because I'm thinking about getting one.
Only LUT box that I technically have is my Lumigen. But for a LUT box, I would say probably EE Color. I think you can get one that's I think it's $399 or $499, and it does.
That's like not too bad.
I think it's a 17:3 or 21:3.
What's that Ninja LUT box I keep hearing about? Am I crazy? Am I thinking of a different name? I think I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah, when we're done here, that's pretty much my plan. Is now that I have all my stuff, I'm gonna no time spare. Like I'm just however long it takes. I'm getting this as good as it gets to be my reference display, and then use that to compare the stuff I review.
It is called the Atomos Ninja 5.
That's a camera monitor / recorder.
Am I crazy? I'm
Because
pretty sure people are
that's
using this as a
the
LUT.
external recorder / monitor that I'm going to get for the camera.
Well, if you're going to get that, like you should be able to literally use it as a LUT box.
I knew that you could like shoot in a log and then add LUTs to it so that when you're viewing it on the display, it's not all flat looking. You can see what it's going to look like when you're done editing the files, but I don't know anything about it being able to.
I'm going to link you to this. I'm going to send you a link in private so you can see it. That's the ABS thread I just found it on, because I've heard about it, and it's only $600.
Yeah, so KG, just remember 7780J does have near A90J binning, so you should get a good panel. You shouldn't have to worry about that. And I'm part of my process tonight is I have a new idea in my head that I'm going to double check to make sure it works out. But if it does, you'll be able to get near calibrated results without a calibration on it.
So far, I like the A90J. The only problem, so they changed Google TV from the previous models.
Yeah, it's no longer Android TV. It's now Google TV.
Yeah, and I don't like that. Like I didn't pay attention to it before, and that's probably because when I was doing it for the client, I didn't have to sign in. I had already told them just to go ahead and download the Calman for Bobia app.
They own you.
But now that I actually signed in, I actually set it up from out of the box. I don't like the changes they made to it. The television itself is great. I was playing around with your guys' white point. The only problem is that I can't verify that it's correct. There's no way I can verify that it's correct unless I get a i1 Pro.
Or
true.
Possibly, I'm going to work on it, but as soon as I can, I'll get a CR250. I'm pretty sure that's what I'm going to go with. So then I'll be able to do both.
Measure both.
Yeah, because that's the only way that I could actually verify that it's right is if someone either measures it with a colorimetry research, photo research, or something along those lines.
So
it's still definitely less blue than Judd for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't want to open a whole can of worms, but can you even trust an i1 Pro 2 to calibrate to D65 if a CR250 is going to measure something different?
No, that's what D Nice was saying before, is that it doesn't. What is the point in having it matched to two different spectros when someone's going to have the I1 and it's going to be off by the amount that it's off, regardless what white point that you're targeting?
No. I'm not talking about alternate white points. Let's say you're just working as a calibrator, and let's say both me and Sammie are going to calibrate the same TV. So he's going to do ISF day, I'm going to do ISF night to reference, right? I use my equipment, he uses his. If we both cross-reference verify each other's calibrations with different gear, we're going to see different results.
Yeah.
So the question is the technology, being that it's a shorter wavelength, wide gamut display, is that changing how the old meters read, or is the newer equipment more accurate? So it's kind of a sticky situation for me, because you almost need to use an alternate white point on the i1 Pros if you're going to in general, if you're even going to try to match a more narrowband spectra anyway. So it's almost like you can't calibrate to D65, because if you do, it's going to look pink no matter what. And someone was mentioning in the thread how a lot of these correction files are to remove that magenta look that you get. So even if your i1 Pro 2 is accurate on a narrow display like that, it's going to look weird. It's not going to look right.
I think it's accurate enough to get you close enough to where it's supposed to be. The problem is that you have no point of reference because the delta is too large. Like you have such a large gap for what's an acceptable error. That's where it gets a little sticky, because I want to say that you're what plus 0.004 plus or minus.
In either direction,
yeah, that's enough to say, for instance, you're measuring something and you're already targeting at the upper end of that coordinate. That's enough to put you over, which could make a fairly significant difference. But that is depending on how accurate the meter is, because just because it's a plus or minus of, a 0.004 plus or minus, it doesn't mean that that's where you're at. Like you could be dead on. So I think it's accurate enough to be close. The problem is where it's going to be accurate enough to do something that is very narrow bandwidth, and that's where it comes to lasers, fluorescent lasers, single channel lasers like RGB. That's where you're going to come across a problem.
Yeah, well, I would say the difference in the meters is not nearly even as much difference as there is between the metamerism of what D65 is supposed to look like versus what we're seeing on the OLED. So I don't think anyone should be doing D65 on the OLEDs, but yeah.
Same. Well, I mean, put this way, let's say you put a CR250 on a Kuro or a plasma, like a VT60. If you put the CR250 and an i1 Pro 2 Spectro and you both calibrate to D65, they're going to be like within a click of each other. They're going to be super close. If you do the same thing on an OLED, they're going to be different, and it's going to be more than a few clicks. Like it's going to be fairly significant. So it's not that the equipment's bad. I think it's like you almost have to perceptually match now. So rather than using that meter to just calibrate to D65 on the OLED, I feel like you have to perceptually match, take a reading with your meter, and then set that as your target for the colorimeter, and that's the only way you can do it now. You can't rely on sharing coordinates or any of this stuff because the panels are changing every year. That's why I'm keeping this 42-inch plasma in my house, is so that I can put it side by side and I actually can look at these displays and go, okay, this looks like D65, this doesn't.
And that's why, like, when all of us were talking and you're saying, like, okay, should I get a colorimeter first or a spectro? Like, I kind of always keep leaning towards a spectro just because it's going to improve everything. What your colorimeter reads, it's not that it doesn't matter, right? But if you have an i1D3 and you're using that as a colorimeter, it's going to be, say, 90% right on if you do a profile off of a reference spectro. The only thing that's going to be a little iffy is going to be the lower end darker areas, right?
Super dark areas.
And that's just because of it doesn't have the ability to read that low level of light. Whereas if you go with the colorimeter, your calibrations are going to go a lot faster, but you still have the issue of your spectro not being able to read super narrow bandwidths. It's pretty decent at 100 nits, but as soon as you start going down, if you're going to be doing, like, say, for instance, a white balance adjustment in the service menu, and you decide to do like 22 points, you're going to have a problem with the spectro just because it cannot read that low, and the level of accuracy is going to decrease as you go lower. So it's kind of like, do you increase the overall performance and have just the lower end a little iffy just due to how it reads low light? Or do you go the other route, increase your speed, and then still have everything slightly off? And that's why I always kind of lead back to, like, you're probably better off with a spectro, especially if you're doing calibrations and someone's paying you for it. You should probably get a spectro.
Yeah, I'm thinking that might be the next step. So we'll see.
Just wait for what I just said a few minutes ago, and I'll probably have a video on it shortly. Yeah. And then KG, the box for the 7780J, I swear it's like that. It's not a thick box. It's very, very small compared to the LGs. So you should be all right. And I don't know what is going on. Like, get a Sony camera for their autofocus. What's going on?
It's trying to focus on your TV, maybe.
I know, but it should be focusing on me.
It's like, no, let's look at the Sony.
Doesn't yours have that like eye tracking focus too?
Yeah, I probably don't have it. I mean, I have autofocus on, but I didn't change the mode. Let me see what's defaulting to.
So, do you remember the question that you asked Jason on the webinar with Ryan about the USB patterns that I fed you?
Yes. Yeah.
That right there is one of the reasons why I'm buying the Murideo. And I'm not going all bougie with the 7G. I'm going to get the 6G. But in fact, that freaking USB, it's at the installer's house right now. It's still hooked into FOMO's TV. I hope it doesn't get shipped out. It's fine because the patterns didn't work. So if I get the Murideo, if I get the Murideo, and the fact that I now have Ryan's patterns that are loaded on there, I can load on there. But the fact that I believe you can adjust the Dolby Vision profile, or they'll have firmware to give you different versions of Dolby Vision to send to the TV, it's going to work for whatever I'm sending out. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But what a lot of people don't realize is, like, you see these cats on YouTube that say, oh, I use Mobile Forge to calibrate the TV, which they're mirroring their phone to the TV. Or the part of the calibration process is your patterns need to be bit perfect. The video chain has to be exactly the same way it would be as if you're popping in a Blu-ray movie. So everything you do in the whole chain has to be accurate. Otherwise, your calibration is invalid, because if you switch it to a video input and the black levels are wrong, you're screwed. And even with this new laptop I bought, I can't use the HDMI out on it for test patterns, because the actual graphics card is altering like how the color looks. So you can't use it.
Mobile Forge is actually only, if I recall correctly, and it's been a while, but Mobile Forge is actually only bit perfect on 3 devices: a specific old school Fire Stick, a newer version of the Fire Stick, and I want to say on a specific version of an Apple TV. If they're using Mobile Forge in that sense, it will work, but they're very specific ones. Like if you use the first gen Fire TV Cube, it's not. But if you use, I think, like the second gen, for instance, Fire Stick, old school one, it is. So it depends on what they're using it for, but it's not a great solution, but it is it's an easy solution. It's a very inexpensive solution that does work.
Yeah. And then I had the old ABS, was it 709 or the Get Gray disc? And so when I used to calibrate the old TVs, you'd have to go chapter to chapter to get through all your test patterns.
Yep.
I still have it. Yeah.
I have it somewhere.
I got it in storage somewhere, but like to get between like 20% and like 70% patterns, you remember how many clicks it is? Like click, 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 go back, click, click, click. So like a lot of stuff like that is the reason I'm upgrading. But currently the solution I have is good, but there's going to be scenarios I run into where I cannot rely on it. And I can't verify. I can't verify Dolby Vision. I can't verify HDR10 from an external pattern.
Yeah, and if you don't have a way to force HDR, can you even do HDR?
So for all the sets that I've been doing currently, I haven't ran into any issues because they've all been Sonys and LGs.
But you can force it.
Where I can either force it, or I can use internal pattern generator to verify it.
Right.
Or with the Sonys use their math. But if I run into projectors or Samsungs, or there's different displays that you can't use those tricks.
Yeah, and what I noticed when using the Raspberry Pi, if I tried to set the Sony to force HDR, it kind of worked, but really didn't. Like if you were to do a brightness measurement, it was like 500 nits. Not.
I don't force it. So like I won't flip the Sony into the HDR mode. I simply will calibrate on a separate input and let Sony do its conversion. So I just do a full 20 point in SDR. What I'd like to do though is then validate it with the Murideo and run the patterns in true HDR to make sure that the math was correct. Because if it's not, then you might make little adjustments here and there for the HDR.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. I would calibrate an SDR, but then when you wanted to measure an HDR to see if it worked, using the Raspberry Pi did not work out that well.
Nope, you can't do it. Yeah, no, that's exactly the scenario I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So you can't rely on the TV.
So that's where I would previously I would just get the Spears and Munzel disc when I wanted to verify my HDR white point and use their patterns. Yep. It worked, but then you're digging through a menu, clicking one at a time, and with the drift from being an OLED, if it heats up, cools down because you're taking too long to switch patterns.
True.
It's also a mess.
That's why I've got it's a 32 gig USB, and I've got a 16 gig USB. One of them's got all the HDR patterns, one has all the Dolby Vision patterns from Ryan. And the HDR ones work on Sony's, Samsung's, LG, everything. It's only the Dolby Vision ones I had problems with. But the content that's on there, there's a lot of fantastic test images. There's lots of cool stuff on his disc.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff is on the 7 as well, which is cool. There's a few patterns. I have to look through the 7 again and see if there's anything I want to load up, but I definitely want to load up that pixel flipper. Pixel flipper is going to be huge.
Yeah, I guess I saw it in person. I can't wait for it. Yes, the ADJ77 is more in line with the G1, not the C1.
That pixel flipper is also good, I would assume, if you're trying to break in a TV before calibration.
That's
so you can run that overnight. Yep, just run it overnight. When you're not watching the TV, run it for 8 hours. Wake up, turn the TV off, let it do a comp cycle, watch TV as normal, run it again. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people mess that up. You really don't want to run a TV 100 hours straight. When you're breaking it in. Maybe back in the day you could, but no, you don't want to.
You can get away with it with plasma, but not with OLED. You have to actually turn it off.
Yeah. And so, KG, you had the 65s, and one or both, or who knows, were old panels versus new. At 77 inches, the ADJ, all of them are the new panel, and that's where Sony doesn't software restrict it like LG does. So the ADJ is brighter in high APL and highlights than the C1, and it pretty much is a match for the G1.
I'm excited because I have an LG to calibrate tomorrow, and the past week it was 7 Sony TVs.
Sonys are cool. They're good to break up the monotony.
Yeah, it's true. Doing it old school on all the Sonys.
pretty much. I mean, that's the thing. When you do a Sony, you actually, even if, say for instance, you did decide to run AutoCal, you still are going to go through and verify everything and touch everything up manually anyways.
That's what I did.
Yeah, whereas opposed to with the LG, you're literally running 4,000 patches and then reviewing a lot, and you're just reviewing it, and then you're uploading it, and then after that you're really calibrating 2 more modes.
Dolby.
Yeah, that's it.
It's fun. I mean, there's a lot of little tricks you learn on the LG, the difference in brightness between game mode and standard mode, and adjusting the OLED lights for that. I mean, there's a lot of little tiny things that you learn over the days. But recently, I think doing the Sonys has been more interesting for me, because I really what I love seeing Calman and doing the grayscale myself and doing the CMS myself, and then still using color space to validate it and seeing similar results. And I'm just nice. Yeah. It's a nice pat on the back when you actually did a good job. So I like it.
From what I see on the forums and comments, whatever, it seems like more people who buy Sonys want a calibration, more people that buy LGs are do-it-yourselfers that want to toy with the settings themselves, or get the stuff and do their own calibration.
So what I can tell you is that if you don't have the equipment, you can't calibrate. That's all I'm going to say, because I've yet to run into a Sony or LG that has a good white point out of the box where you could apply someone else's settings to it. The LGs have been too blue. The Sonys have been too blue or too red. you need a Spectro to even get started with calibrating these sets.
KG, they're just gonna say you've just been bought out by all three, and you're not gonna show no appreciation to Hisense or TCL or anyone else.
We saw that LG Video Tech. We know that 77s pay off.
Yeah, you're a millionaire front and just waiting on the checks from them.
That's a lot of brands. That's a healthy amount of televisions.
No, I haven't seen anything like that. If you have sharpness turned up too high or reality creation way too high, then maybe. But if everything's set right, no, it's very natural looking.
That looks good.
I mean, honestly, if Panasonic was still sold in the States, I would probably own a Panasonic. I probably own multiple Panasonics over the televisions that I have.
I was a Panasonic.
Yeah, it's like Panasonic kind of strikes the balance between LG and Sony.
Yeah.
And they are, I'm going to say this very confidently, I believe that they do a better job with the actual color out of the box than the Sonys. And if you had the old ones with the heat sink, you got a really bright panel and it was really accurate. And they were very easy to play with. Like you could do all the settings, copy to everything, send it all. Like they're just fantastic to work on. I miss them. Come back.
Yeah, I wish they would.
I mean, I was a fan of their LCDs. I had one.
I had a
2013 or something, but yeah.
Yeah, I had an AX800U. It had like a display port on it. It actually even looked like a plasma. It had this weird issue with color decoding though when it came to green and magenta, but it was only in like very low APL scenes and it was like very low stimulus colors. But yeah, Panasonic was cool. It had a built-in camera I could write on the screen with like an electronic pen. It was cool.
You know, the VT60 and the ZT60, those suckers were thin. People don't realize how thin those TVs were. Like you look at them from the side, and honestly, they're technically thinner than the OLEDs because they don't have that big baby bump at the bottom. But they were thin, like uniform TVs, especially the ZT.
I don't think Samsung gets enough credit for their plasmas, but I think that's because most of them burned in because they pushed the brightness, so they were brighter. I burned in on mine.
I saw one burned in at
their 3D was really good
at Pacific Sales when I was trying to hunt down my VT60 back in the day. Yeah, could have got it for a cheap price, but cool. I'm gonna go because I gotta go hit up the gym.
Yeah, 2 hours. I'm gonna hop off too, and gotta get this done so that I can compare the TCL next to what I would have as closest to reference.
Is that fair though? Is that even fair to do that?
I heard the TCL can keep up with OLEDs, so should be pretty good contest.
The 6 series, I don't get it because it's supposed to be super bright. I'm only measuring 1060 nits, which I know doesn't really mean much, but even watching content, it's like this. The scenes where an LCD should be brighter than an OLED, it's like it's really not that much brighter than the 80J. So if it's like a really high APL scene, then it's brighter. Highlights, there's like no discernible difference, even if they're fairly large. And there's just other things I'm seeing, but yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that a lot of like those mid-range, or I wouldn't even really say mid-range, but like the budget brands, like the TCLs and the Hisense, those cap out at like 500 nits, maybe 600.
But they look bright because the full screen can get bright.
Yes.
So when you calibrate bright,
even SDR, it's like 1050 nits. And full screen is 800 something.
Yeah.
No.
It's pretty bright.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like, does anyone need 800 nit full screen SDR?
Yes.
I mean, if you're outside.
In a black room, pitch black.
I guess if you're disabling HDR and trying to make your SDR look HDR.
Can I just say warning for people that watch Dune? There's like dream sequences in that movie, and if you have a good TV and you're in a pitch black room, you will be blinded Did you guys see
that? Was
that?
the thing I saw on Dune. I was like seeing these big vista shots that are really bright, but that's where I was like, okay, if this was an LCD, it would definitely be a lot brighter. That's where
no.
OLED's being held back a bit.
Pitch black room. He's in a tent. No spoilers. He's having a dream, and it cuts to like the edge of sand with bright blue sky, and it just blinds you. And like it was nuts, but it was cool at the same time. I don't think you could get that effect with like a TCL, because I don't know if you'd get that full black, pitch black look to the screen, but it was definitely cool.
Oh, it looks like KG didn't get his TV.
Nope. I didn't want to laugh.
The projector's back in play.
Nice.
But yeah, I'm gonna go. It was fun, and I'm sure I will talk to you guys later. As always.
All right, thanks for coming.
All right,
Transylvania. Thank you for the super chat. Finally pulled trigger on an 86 QNED 90 from Valley Electronics with calibration. Looking forward to it. Yeah, I think the 86 QNED 90 is certainly the one to get if you're looking at the QNED, because it has, I think it's like 3,000 something zones, and it's right up there. So if especially if you want Dolby Vision gaming and you're not wanting OLED, or you just want the size, like it's a good choice.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Or I mean, not wanting. Wait, is that the LG QNED?
Yeah, QNED. It's
okay.
I would say it's like performance-wise just a hair under the X95J or a little bit below the X95J, but I haven't seen the 86-inch with the 3,000 zones though. So
LG's being very sneaky with that naming convention, because I almost thought that was a Samsung, and I was like 86.
Yeah.
Sneaky LG. Awesome.
All right,
cool, man. Well, I'm gonna head off.
Yep, I'm gonna sign off too. So thank you everybody for coming. I'm gonna try and keep the Classy Tech Tuesday thing going. It may not be every Tuesday, but certainly every other Tuesday, most likely. So
I'm doing Ninjishin Sundays, so Sunday mornings.
Yep, and then KG's got Friday. Pass Through Remote has Wednesday and Saturday.
Perfect. All right, I'll see you, man.
All right, see you everybody.